Hello and welcome to AEF TV in association with Engerati. I'm joined now by Robbin-Coker, who's the CEO of Pawa Ples. And Nia, firstly, pleasure to see you again. Thanks for making the time. Always good to talk to you. So, cutting straight in because of the constraints of time we've got to try and cover the topics we'd like to. One of my observations is that compared to last year, there's been a huge acceleration of power projects on the generation side. Now it is my view that when you start creating more and more output and capacity like that, you also then, and it's a chicken and egg, I accept that, but you then also need to start looking at how you evacuate that power, for want of a better word. The transmission networks that create perhaps interconnectors within country or take power from a generation source to distribution, and then the distribution networks that then distribute and collect revenues type of things. And yes, these are engineering exercises, but they're also expensive engineering exercises. And it seems to me like the formula for power generation and getting private capital into that, I'm oversimplifying when I say it's set, but the formulas are all there. What's the formula for creating that infrastructure that's going to be fit for purpose for all of these multitude of different sources? Where Africa has got this ambition to have a lot of renewables on grid. We all know what comes with that, and geothermal and all diversity of sources. So how do you see that landscape? So and just for the audience to know, we're going to try and focus on transmission and distribution for this chat that we're having.
Okay. Well, I think first and foremost we need to think through the fact that things are changing in many different ways. So Africa is coming a long way in terms of improving its regulatory environment, and that seems to be bringing additional momentum to investment in the generation side. But at the same time, there is this increasing demand on host governments to issue sovereign guarantees or other kinds of guarantees, partial risk guarantees that enable the generation projects to move forward. But at the heart of the issue is revenue collection. You can price your risk on generation as you see fit or price it out through government guarantees, etc. But at the end of the day, even with the government guarantees, if the collection is not working effectively, then it's only a matter of time before you run out of the money, especially if it's a fuel-based kind of generation project. So we have this interesting conundrum at this point in time, because there's a lot of money that comes into the generation side from the private sector, and most of the money that is going into transmission and distribution is public money, whether it's development finance or government-owned finance. And it's a lot of money that is required. Transmission and distribution are extremely expensive. Kilometers of cable are kilometers of cable regardless of where you are in the world. But the reality is that a lot of the countries don't have the balance sheets that allow them to do this easily. Now, one advantage for them is as they move into IPPs, they release more capital to put into the transmission and distribution assets. But for those countries that are trying to make a meaningful leap in terms of the amount of power that they're able to evacuate and meet the needs of their citizens, very often they're cash constrained. And development finance just does not come quickly enough or adequately enough in terms of the amount of dollars that are available. So we all need to think through, how are we going to drive private money into transmission and distribution? Now, some people feel that transmission is a natural monopoly. There's an argument to say it's a monopoly in terms of ownership, but operation and control operation can be handled elsewhere. So you do ownership and control and allow operation and construction to be managed separately.
So hypothetically, could you not bundle some of the transmission needs into some of the IPPs and say, look, it's a collective thing. If you're going to build, and look, we're talking hypothetically, and I'm oversimplifying to illustrate the point. If you're going to build this dam, and the power from this dam needs to get here first, the project is not just the dam, it's everything. So you're responsible to that end point.
You're absolutely spot on. And in fact, I've had discussions in the past where we have agreed with IPP that you can come in and do generation, but you have to be able to put some money into the transmission, and you can recover your money as an add-on to the tariff or as a separate transmission service charge. But what we're finding is that the financiers don't fully recognize these kinds of transactions at this point in time, primarily because it's just out of the box thinking. It's not what they've been trained to do over time. Now you also take into account that you are moving in more and more into a world of distributed generation. You could almost make the argument that, hang on, there's no point in me being a distributed generator somewhere where there's hardly a network. Let me go in and take over completely the network, soup to nuts, from generation to maybe medium voltage transmission and the distribution, and most importantly the revenue collection. Because if I can collect my own revenue, then I can reflect that in my pricing, both in terms of my cost of capital as well as in terms of my tariff.
So is that where, again, we may see, not necessarily new, but certainly more of, a different type of actor coming in, which would be, a bit like, the traditional, maybe European utilities who've got experience of managing all of that soup to nuts, who can then come in and say, yes, I can take that on, because I would imagine that, someone whose expertise lies in building power plants may be a bit reticent to take on that new challenge.
Well, yes, I think it is the space for a different type of actor, but again, it's almost like we're going full circle. So in the more developed markets, we've gone through a process of unbundling. And what I'm saying here is we need to buck the trend when it comes to the more developing markets, and maybe we need to forget about unbundling and actually bundle things. And what that means, first and foremost, is an amount of advocacy with the policy makers, both at the government level and, of course, their policy advisors that come from the international institutions. We had a small example in Sierra Leone of a company that came in, did a refit a mini hydro, did a small network, and actually did their own revenue generation through their own metering, for example, and did their own collection. It has worked reasonably well at this point in time. It'd be nice to explore models like that more, and of course to scale it up. One key question that comes out from a regulatory point of view then is, what's the cost of electricity? Can you afford to have non-harmonized tariffs in different parts of your country? That may be a necessary evil, or it might be something that the government smooths out with some amount of subsidy.
But again, isn't that something that is already being deployed? And again, it's not, again, a lot of these issues, I keep saying this, aren't just uniquely African issues. It's not suddenly, the laws of physics aren't any different in Africa as they are in Europe. But even in Europe, you've got different tariffs to industry. Because they need higher reliability to drain more power. You're already in Europe seeing different tariff structure to incentivize certain industry to maybe operate in different windows and things like that. This is what we're talking about isn't necessarily outlandish.
No, it's not outlandish, but there's different types of differentiation. There you're talking about differentiation based on customer segments, and some of those segments are driven by the industry, the load consumption, etc., etc.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about here is the possibility of differentiation based on geography, because the cost of generation or the cost of electricity delivery is influenced by the geography in which you're operating.
So if you're in one area of the country, it may be cheaper.
It may be a bit cheaper, yes.
If you're in another area, it may be more expensive.
Absolutely. But that's something that can be managed through. I mean, the Exchequer, for what it's worth, can find ways of smoothing that out. But the key is we have to create an environment in which investment in electricity from the private sector is not concentrated on generation, because at the end of the day, it's all about connecting the customer, metering them, collecting revenue, and being able to pay for the generation.
And that is because you're saying that you need private investment into the distribution networks because of the affordability, because of how expensive it is, and some of the states that we're talking about simply do not have the funds. So that's what's driving it.
That is absolutely what's driving it, and it means that if they can't put the distribution in place, then they can't evacuate the power. So all the time and energy being spent on power generation is actually just going to waste. And the reality is, between the government's own budget, drawn from its own revenues, and development financing, very often is inadequate. I mean, frankly, if you look, even in the developed countries, investing in distribution and transmission is still an expensive exercise. And it is highly required as the sector is developed. But for a lot of countries, my experience has been talking to a lot of my former colleagues in West Africa is that they're still dealing with 25-30% distribution losses. Most of that is technical, and that's based on aged and dilapidated networks.
Aged infrastructure. Again, but surely then again, and it's amazing how quickly time passes. We're kind of running to the end of our time here, but let's spend a couple of minutes exploring a few ideas. But I had a gentleman sat in this chair who said that, look, they took over a failing distribution utility. And he said, look, smart meters weren't going to solve the issue. What was going to solve the issue is, good management, capable management, good governance, and then, yes, an infrastructure investment in strengthening the infrastructure. And what he was saying is that within a 5-year time frame, they were able to plug a gap where they, and the numbers he was quoting were much higher, about 60% of losses, taking it down to 80% of losses, 90% of losses. And what he said was quite innovative is that they were given that mandate and they were rewarded by hitting those KPIs, that if they hit those KPIs, they were allowed to take a bigger slice of the revenue cake as they started hitting that.
Exactly.
And then also there was a reward at the end of it where they were told that if you get it to looking like this, we're then going to make this a public business.
Okay.
So what you're selling in is a roadmap.
Yep.
Doesn't that sound like a sensible approach, or is it too sensible?
It sounds like an extremely sensible approach.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we find that the policymakers are a little bit reticent. Electricity has some political ramifications.
Well,
and
sure.
Therefore,
Yeah.
some people want to have a handle on it.
Yeah.
We think that franchise models may be the way to go. So you take a region, you develop an electricity franchise around it, you regulate that franchise, you agree with the franchise operator what the KPIs are, what the cost of generation will be, what's an appropriate charge to recover their capital investment in transmission and distribution. And the management element is extremely important. Agreed. But the only thing that blends all of that together is something based on a franchise-like or concession model, because you have skin in the game, the investor has skin in the game, they have a fair amount of control, they know what the regulatory environment is that they're hoping to operate in, and therefore it becomes a reasonable investment. But the situation we have where we're looking at management contractors to come in and take on responsibility, but they have no skin in the game. Generators are there trying to feed in, dealing with a management contractor who's waiting for a state to make asset investment. It's still a bit messy and just does not build the kind of confidence. We need good private money, even if it's subsidized private money, in the transmission and distribution. On the generation side, we're working with partial risk guarantees. We need to create structures that mitigate risk in the private and the transmission and distribution side, and allow private money to flow into it.
And create those similar frameworks. Nia, we really have pushed the envelope and we have come to the end of our time. Pleasure talking to you as always. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching this interview on the final day second day, I'm wishing my life away, second day of AEF. So Nia, once again, thank you very much, and thank you as well for watching.
Thank you too. Cheers.